Welcome to Edmond Fosu Inspires YouTube channel. I'll urge you to subscribe below so that when we post new videos, you'll be able to receive notifications and not miss some of these videos. Today, we'll be looking at some key concepts in international relation. These are not all the concepts in international relation, but this will be broken up into three different videos. The first one, which is the A, will cover some of the concepts. The B will do, and then the C will do so. We'll be looking at what at all is international relation, explain the nature of international politics and the key actors. We'll also be looking at national power, national interest, and national security. We'll compare the balance of power versus coercive security and understand diplomacy, power diplomacy, and then alliance, anarchy, and polarity. The pictures you see in your screen depicts and give you the feeling that the first one on your left is that of what the the UN building that you see flags around, which depicting that of what intergovernmental organizations and their role also in international relation. You see numerous countries and their flags depicting each and every country and the fact that states are a very important part of international relation. Also, we move to our next session where we're looking at what at all is international relation. But before we look at what is international relation, we'd want to look at the statement where Aristotle, the famous Greek philosopher, stated that man is a social animal by nature. That man as a social animal cannot exist in isolation. So he further says that for us to be able as individuals or states, we cannot afford to live in isolation. And no state can afford to exist in isolation because there may be resources you'd have to have access to from different states. There may be places you have to explore. So this brings to the fore that this brings to the importance of the fore of international relation. So the first thing we want to do is that what at all is international relation, as I said earlier. So we will say international relation is a field of study in the social science, right? That examines political interactions that is across state or across state borders. So we are not referring to interstate, where maybe the president and then the local authority. No, we are referring to that of a state to state that cuts beyond the borders of what a particular state. An example is having to, you see Vladimir Putin having to meet President Donald Trump at Alaska. That is international relation. Having to see the UK Prime Minister um, having to meet that of Donald Trump. That is what international relation. So at the core, you're looking at the relations among what sovereign states, as I said what earlier. So it may come from security, welfare, freedom, all that. All these are some of the things that underpins that of what international relation. So we'll move to various definitions by some of these great individuals, right? And then Dr. Hans Morgenthau, who is seen as part of the contemporary fathers of realism. So looking at these scholars and then their definitions and their meaning, I'll seek to explain what these definitions key to connote to us. So these scholars' definitions means a lot, and then there's no one single definition for the discipline. Yeah, there's no one single definition for the discipline. So we'll be looking at what the main units are, what the main drivers of these definitions what are. So we'll take on the first one, which is Lincoln, who says that interactions of state policy within the changing patterns of power relation. So this definition keeps the spotlight on what on states and their policy. So it says that international relations is about how government interact as the patterns of what of power shift. So the key word are interaction and changing power. So when power rises or decline because of economic growth, alliance or technology, state power adjusts and that is the core of what international relation. So, for example, there were a time where Great Britain, before the First World War, were a huge powerhouse. When time changes, we've gotten to a point where the United States is at the helms of a lot of affairs, realize that things has changed in the global space. Most of that, you see, the UK seems to sometimes do its foreign policy in alliance with what the United States. This shows you that when power and things changes, it brings four different things, as Lincoln alluded to over here. So we go to Wright, who also says that he says that international relation as the relation between groups of people major what important is a major importance in the life of the world at any period of what of history, and particularly relations among territorial what organized nation states, which today are such what important. So Wright focuses lens by saying that nation states are what central, but he allows that other big groups can matter, or can matter, which is empires in history, great power blocks, or even organizations that becomes major in what in a given era. So international relation is not just a state to state, but it can also what include blocks or groupings that will shape the era. So this is from his perspective, right? So for example, we are looking at OPEC Plus, which was in the 1970s. This is a group of oil producer countries that have joined an alliance and then to regulate and control global oil prices. So sometimes you hear that OPEC Plus has met. The plus as part is Russia. So that is it. So they somehow you see they try to drive oil prices a little bit balanced or stable or higher. Yeah. So looking at the European Union today, which is a regional also bloc that shape trade rules and then standards for what many states. So right would count that as what international relation because of its global what importance, even though it is not what a single state. Are you getting me? Because currently, even with the issues of AI, you realize that you have the European Union being able to come out with a policy that is able to what guide the all EU countries. So that is what we are talking about. And talking about Hans Morgenthau, who is seen as one of the contemporary fathers of realism, which in the subsequent videos when we're talking about realism, we'll be talking about him. So he says that it is what the struggle for the use of power among nations. I hope you're getting. So for him, this international politics is a struggle for power, and by power, he means the control over the minds and actions of others, not only military force. So Morgenthau gives us that realist core of international relation about power getting others to do things without having necessarily having to use only power. Even though he alludes to power, he or force, he says that it's not the only one. People can also be influenced. So power includes what material force, but also the capacity to persuade, deter, and shape what experience expectations. I hope you're getting me. That's what Morgenthau also talks about. So looking at the nature of international politics. So international politics is a set of what relationship and what exchange between sovereign states, as I've mentioned of cooperation across world borders. So because each state has its own national interests, those interests are often not what identical. So for example, the interest of Russia and China in certain places may differ because of its what national what or its what interest. That's how it is. Even though you may even have countries that may find itself in the European Union, you may find that some of the interests of these countries may not align because of what they all seek individually at some point. So this different interest is what sometimes lead to the concept of anarchism, which we'll talk about in our subsequent also what slide. So actors of international relation. Actors are individuals, organizations, or institutions whose actions and inactions influence the international system in a profound way. So, in these actors, we have two types of actors. We have both the primary and then what? and the primary actors and non-state actors. So the primary actors, these are states. These are the sovereign states we are talking about. These are the primary actors, the states that are what sovereign in nature. So they make foreign policy, they sign treaty, they raise for arms, imposition of sanctions, and they decide when to cooperate or complete, when to cooperate. So all these things are done by what? By state. So they influence territory, they pass laws and all those. So these are all what? These are what the primary actors. The primary actors are what? Solely the state. So when you see the president of Ghana and Nigeria meeting, you should know that these are two primary actors who are engaging at the what? At the highest what level. When you also move to non-state actors, non-state actors, which are here. So the non-state actors are the intergovernmental organizations. You are looking at the likes of the multinational corporations. So the intergovernmental organizations like the UN, the AU, ECOWAS, European Union, all these are what non-state what actors. I hope you're getting me. They gain some autonomy and sets what rules that what constraints or what enable what states. So that is when these non-state are, so the UN Forum for Diplomacy, Peacekeeping, Sanction Committee, all these are functions under what the non-state what actors. We have multinational corporation that also influence the happenings in the international systems, which examples like the likes of the Amazon, McDonald's, the likes of what the United Nations we've mentioned, all these companies, multinational companies, are able to lobby for rules that may favor them, and also these are all part of it. And we also have the anti-state or violent or non-state actors, the violent non-state actors or anti-state actors, which are the terrorist organization. So groups like the likes of Al Qaeda, Islamic State, Boko Haram, they operate across borders, and this beyond violence, they use symbolic politics to redefine what discourse and affect what state choices. So that's why we see them as non-state actors, because their activities transcend beyond just one border. Hope you're getting me, and it's become one place where nations actually spend time to combat terrorism and have to deal with what terrorism at all levels. So we are on national power. So first of all, we're going to talk about the role of power or what power is. So power is both what a means and an end in international politics. So states use power to get what they want, and they also seek power for what its own what sake. So because more power usually means more security and freedom of action. So before you can flex your muscles within the international space, you need to have what more power. You need to be what have power. That's military economic mind, that you'll be able to flex what your muscles that much on the international what stage. So somebody will ask and say, President Donald Trump and Putin are meeting without Zelensky. I may say, look at the power at play. Russia is a nuclear armed nation with a lot of nuclear weapons, and likewise the United States, and also a powerful nation, the world's hegemony at this moment, where some scholars also argue about that, but the world was hegemony. That should tell you that the capacity and the power of Russia and the US is not the same as Ukraine. So sometimes they could be tossed around. You're going to be invited or not going to be invited. This tells you that power plays a lot of important role when it comes to what international what politics or national what power. So your national power will determine how far you can go. Because so in practice, every country what continuously is trying to obtain what or keep or increase and use what power. So you find the fact that European countries now are trying to buy more weapons stock, try to increase their productions of weapons because of what national power. So the national power is the engine that supports the state's efforts to protect its national interest. Because if you don't have national power, you are weak in national power, you cannot protect your national interest. So, for example, now Ukraine have to rely on allies or weapons from allies such as the European Union, the United States, and all these. So if these allies decide not to send weapons to Ukraine, you realize that it will be a very terrible war. It will be very challenging for what for Ukraine to fend off attacks, area drone attacks, also missile attacks, and then even ground what incursion by what Russian troops. That tells you that national power is of importance because it is what drives your national what interest. So you see, when it comes to the trade negotiation between that of the United States and then China, you realize that the US imposed certain tariffs. China also retaliated, imposed certain tariffs, and later they had to come to the table and talk. Likewise, maybe Switzerland cannot do that with what? With the United States because of its what? National power. Because the US were able to pursue. Togo cannot stand against the United States when it comes to its national power in terms of either economic or military. No. So always Togo would have to succumb to the national interest of what of the United States because of its what national what power. That is how it is. So Morgenthau's, as we've spoken about, what is he said, as he used to say that international politics, like all politics, is a struggle for what for power, and by the power, he means that man's control over the minds and actions of of other men. That reminds us of the power. It's not only guns, as I've already alluded to. It can also be influence, credibility, and what. So, for example, Taiwan may want recognition from other states, but because of the national power of China, you realize that most countries in the United Nations cannot recognize China. They still want to. They still have to recognize the one China policy. The one China policy that seeks that China is the only one, and then Taiwan may be somehow not a member of have a seat of as a country under the United Nations, but under China. You see, so countries all operate on that one China policy because of the national power of China. Because, for example, a country like Ghana would not want to go against China's one China policy to recognize Taiwan and no and have maybe diplomatic dealings with Taiwan. It will come with a lot of restrictions and all those things. So it will end up hand, hampering the country's what progress on in a global system or international system. So based on this, you realize that Ghana would then have to kowtow to that particular policy if they may not even agree because the national power of China is huge over here, and then it would outwit that of the national power of what of Ghana. So moving forward on the same assertion where we're talking about we want to talk about how to make as in it's concrete, how in concrete term it is in terms of how states uh, obtain, keep, increase, and use this national power. So the first one I want to use maintain, obtain. Obtain means build the base. So they grow the economy, develop technology, train people, improve infrastructure, and what intelligence systems. So we realize that 30, 40, 50 years ago, China did not have such huge what, even though they were powerful, they didn't have that huge national power. So you realize that 30 years ago, you had the likes of Japan being a very powerful economy. So China having a conscious effort that they want to increase their national power. What do you see? China started growing its what economy, right? When it comes to technology, China is now in the technology space. Now even moving to space and having to launch what satellite, having to launch a mission to the moon and all these things. These are all part of it. The training people, that their human capital, improving infrastructure, intelligence system, investing in artificial intelligence. The same way you see the United States also what doing, where they are the world largest what economy. They are advanced in what microchips. So when it comes to microprocessors that are used for weapons and all those things, the US is at the forefront of this production. The training of human capital, you have that of what infrastructure and the intelligence system. So they are this in terms of what building the base. The US has built its base. Are you getting me? So that is what we are talking about. National what power. So obtain, then keep. So preserving what you have. So you realize that the US over the period seeking to preserve what they have may have military base in other part of what of the continent and all those. And so there's also what the preserving what you have. So increase, that's a compound advantage. having to invest in other places using soft power and other stuff. So the US does that a lot, else does that. And then there's also what a use, which is what the outcome. So deterrence or what compliance. So you realize that sometimes sanctions may go to countries telling that if you don't do this, you don't do that, the sanctions, the diplomacy may play its game throughout. So this is what national power. So we also have to understand that power, in a sense, is very important in international relation, because your power will help you pursue your national power will help you pursue your what your national interest. Then characteristics or categories categorize nature of what of this particular what power that we are talking about. So looking at the characteristics of power, let's also note that, as I said earlier, power is the currency of international politics. And then uh, you'd have to think of power as what the capacity to shape others. Like you have the capacity to shape others' choices and to gain an advantage over them, always relatively to what others can do. That's one important power. But also, let's not make it as if it's all about shaping others, advantage over others, and then really no, no. Also, power can also be used for public good, like peacekeeping, disaster response, for self-interest. These are all some of the things. So you realize that power being used by other countries to cooperate among themselves toward where you currently find UN peacekeepers also what which sources military personnel from different countries are in South Sudan, offering what peacekeeping and all those things to help to ensure what peace within South Sudan. So all these are some of the also the good of what of power. So we want to look at the categorized nature of power, which is the hard power and the soft power, which is very important. So hard power is the traditional or the physical military side of influence. So the ability to make others do what they do not want to face, they don't want to do, because if they decide not to do it, they may face negative what consequences. So based on this, even though they may not want to do it, they would then have to do it. I hope you're getting, because there is a component of what consequences. So I want to explain this by using the carrot and stick philosophy. The carrot and stick philosophy. So you pay attention. And so you see, the carrot and stick philosophy, which explains this very well. It's like, so the stick is the coercion or the punishment. So you have the stick, which is to coerce, the coercion and the punishment. So the threat of use of force, sanctions, embargo, the asset freezing, military posture or strike. That's the stick. Then the carrot is what? The inducement, the reward. That's why you say carrot and stick. So I have the stick holding me. I'm threatening you that if you don't do this, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to rape you with it. Then I say, okay, if you do it, I also give you $10,000. So that's what the carrot and what and the stick approach. So the carrot being what the inducement, the reward. So the aid, the debt relief, investment, market access, security guarantees. Those are what the carrot. So how it works together is that, so a single cost for what non-compliance, which is the stick, and the benefit for what compliance, which is what the carrot. So, for example, some people said recently that maybe President Donald Trump was using the carrot and stick approach, where he was then threatening President Putin that if you don't have to deal with the Russian-Ukraine war, there will be secondary sanctions, which means there'll be sanctions on the likes of India and China, who are importing oil from what from Russia, which brought the Russian President Vladimir Putin to the table, called for a meeting that they met at what Alaska. So somebody to a far extent can push that that was more like a carrot and stick approach used by what President Donald Trump. Okay, get me. So the United States offers what foreign aid over the period, which is a carrot, to countries that support its policy, while strengthening what economic sanctions against others who may what uh, don't want to go to. So that's what the stick aspect of it. Are you getting me? That's what we mean by what the carrot and stick what approach. So now soft power is the ability to manufacture consent and what persuade to get others to what to follow your lead because they find you what attractive or credible. That is soft power. So soft power, for example, South Korea spreading its culture globally through what K-pop and drama. I hope you're getting me, making it more what influential without direct force. So there are soft power that is being used by China, where there's exchange programs or other things that also happen. So this is also part of what soft what power. So we'll move to the next slide, which is what national security. So looking at national security, power is both what you have got, which is your military, your economy, the people, the geography, and how well you convert it as in terms of leadership, tech, or diplomacy. I hope you're getting me. So the interest tells you what to aim for. The security tells you what to protect. So the security is what tells us what to protect. So when national security is tied to what state sovereignty, territorial integrity, and what internal what stability. So in practice, government organized security what around a few what core components, which is protecting the borders, run an effective intelligence system, maintain armed force, and build resilience against what hybrid or unconventional what threat. So when we say all these things, you realize that there are countries who are able to uphold the national security well. Countries like the United States, United Kingdom, countries like Germany don't joke with their national what security in terms of the protection of their territorial what borders, their intelligence and the armed forces. So you take Israel's armed forces, uh, the intelligence gathering. So we realize that when the Israel-Iran conflict was going on, uh, so you realize that the Mossad were accused of having to carry out covert what operations and all those things, and they are quite what very strong and mighty in terms of what the intelligence what space. So that is one thing of it, and also looking at the what we spoke about the component, which is the border, which is the land, the sea, the air front, as we spoke about the intelligence, which is the intelligence community, what the US boasts of what of its CIA, Russia boasts of its KGB, and then the UK also boasts of what of MI6, and also that of Israel boasts of that of what the Mossad. As these are very powerful intelligence what agencies that picks intel across the entire length and breadth of what of the world. So the armed forces, the capability of the army, the naval, and then what the air force to deter what or defend if against any what threat. So you realize that the U.S. have a naval base, a strong naval base. They do have that of an army. They do have also a strong what air force. Likewise, that of China, that of also what other what countries around what the world, and then also having to deal with hybrid threats from non-conventional and other stuffs. Yeah, so this is it. So security is about defense, uh, determinant. So security comes with what the defense, deterrence, and then what resilience. So moving to our next slide, where we're looking at national interest. We've mentioned this term in between our study over. So the national interests are the goals and objectives a state strives to achieve in its what external relation. So what leaders judge necessarily for their nation's security and well-being. So when we've learned something from Morgan Tino, when he shapes our understanding, say that the core meaning of national interest is survival, protecting a state, physical, political, or cultural identity from what encroachment. I hope you're getting me. So what is the national interest? So because sovereign states have non-identical interests, they often what cooperate on same issues and collide on others. So in pursuit of this goal, they frequently use what force, diplomacy, economic, or military. Are you getting me? So for example, we find that arguably the Russian president makes a claim that uh, this particular war is based on its national interest because of the expansion of NATO. That is the claim by President Vladimir Putin. So in his mind, he feels that this is to protect what his national what interest. That's what he feels, or that's what he thinks is at play over here. So that's why I say national interest is what the leaders will judge necessary for what their nation's what security. That is what it means. So the same way when the US was attacked at 9/11, you realize that in the moment President George Bush II also realized that in its national interest was to what, to respond to what terrorist what activity. So in that state, the United States what thought that that would be it in its national interest, because having to deal with what terrorist organization that seeks for their also their demise or their death. So that is what national interest what looks like over here. So national interest can come in classified into primary or secondary. There may be other forms, but I'm just thinking primary and secondary. So the primary one interest being what the fundamental ties to security, which is the territory, the population, government. When vital interests are at stake, other interests take a back seat. Okay, so but whenever it's an issue of territory, population, or about the government, the national interest of this three is at the utmost the most important. So any issue apart from this takes a backseat. So when it comes to, if every country seeks to protect its territorial what borders or any inch of it, so every country is moves inward with full what course. And the secondary interest is the economic growth, development, alliance. So they support security, but not and that is supposed to help them survive. So that is it. So you find that maybe alliance of what NATO, which is a security pact that is meant for countries that feel that it's in their interest to have that alliance, so that to fend any aggression from Russia in the future. And as when I was speaking about national power, you remember one thing I said when we were speaking about national power, where I said that um, your national to be able to protect your national interest will require your national power. So if your national power is relatively mute or small, definitely you will not be able to what do much when it comes to protecting your national interest. Because, for example, when it comes to a country like, so some of the tools that states use to pursue their national interest as a mixed one. So diplomacy, which is about negotiation, mediating for what coalition, maybe shuttle diplomacy, the panda diplomacy. There's also what propaganda, which is to shape perspective, a perception of what, or to build what support. So sometimes people accuse the Russian Federation of having to use propaganda in terms of the Russian-Ukraine war, having to say it's a special military or training, and that they are doing a cleansing of certain. So all these are some of the things that people actually also allude to in that regard. So propaganda is also part of having to use as a tool makes when it comes to national interest. Economic means, which is domestic development, um, alliance and treaties. You have that of NATO style agreement. These are the ones we're talking about, and then the coercive means, which is the last source, which is the armed conflict or war, which leaders judge vital interest, what feel like their vital interest is what is at risk. So these are some of the measures to for determining national what, or considering when leaders are contemplating about national interest. So So in the subsequent video, we'll be talking about the balance of power and then coercive diplomacy and other ones. So this particular video has ended, and then I'll urge you to subscribe and then like the video if you like it, so that when you receive the part 2 of it, you'll be able to also get a notification and then watch it. Thank you very much.